All right, let's just for approval for the May 15 meeting.
I have no changes. I can approve the minutes as written.
Copy, seconded. All right, so anything else on that?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right, I think we have a presentation by the staff. We can go ahead with the presentation, staff. For A.
So I apologize. It's the first time I'm doing the hybrid here. So just let me know if you can see the slideshow. Great. So can everyone see me on the board? Okay, wonderful. So I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Carlin Shorb, and we should have Travis Greiman with our consultants from Benesh here with us today online. I'm here to give an update on our Americans with Disabilities Act self-evaluation and transition plan. And we'll take questions at the end if that's okay. Basically, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a national civil rights law. It requires that states, local governments, special districts, and all contractors of these entities providing a public service for the entity to meet certain fundamental accessibility requirements. There's also other federal and state and mandates that also address disability. Those would include, sorry, I think I went a little far, the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, HB 211110, which is all has to do with digital accessibility. There's something called the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and there's a Federal Fair Housing Act and an Architectural Barriers Act. All of those play a part in determining how the city is going to handle accessibility in both our infrastructure and all of our other program services and activities. Accessibility mandates, as a reminder, under these various laws, they can affect any program, service, or activity of the city. That could include the architectural compliance of buildings, parks, the public right-of-way, events, programs, services, our billing systems online, any documents, multimedia, agendas, anything like that. It also includes the provision of auxiliary aids and the way we communicate with individuals with disabilities who need different methods of communication. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, one of my jobs that I've had since I came on board was to make sure that we're complying appropriately with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's basically 6 requirements, kind of overarching or umbrella requirements of the ADA. The first one is to appoint an ADA coordinator, that's me, to post public notice of non-discrimination citywide, set up a grievance procedure for the public to be able to submit grievances and complaints regarding any access issues at the city, to reasonably modify rules, policies, and procedures to avoid discriminating against people with disabilities, to provide what are called reasonable modifications. What you all may have heard more often is what people call reasonable accommodations, although the law specifically for Title II calls it reasonable modifications, and then undertake a self-evaluation and transition plan to ensure that our policies, procedures, and actions at the city are all compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I'm going to give you an update today on the self-evaluation and transition plan primarily. I wanted to just do a couple of things just to review before I get to the self-evaluation and transition plan. I wanted to introduce you to the city's ADA coordinators. I am the Title II ADA coordinator. I'm the program manager for the Office of ADA Compliance and Accessibility. But we do have folks who would also also be considered ADA coordinators here at the city too. And I just thought it would be nice for everyone to know who those folks are. You all may have met William Flowers. He's our digital accessibility coordinator here at the city. He works for the city communications office, and he ensures that all of our digital communications are compliant under that HB 11126 state law, and now more recently the federal mandates as well. Pat Sylvester and Fazaria Coons and the employee relations team, they handle what we would call all of the Title I employee relations ADA accommodation requests and any complaints or grievances that would come from employees. So just a quick reminder, if employees have any accommodation issues or ADA issues, they should still go to human resources to handle those. I'm dealing with everything that's public facing and with the public. And then I wanted to give a shout out to Bray Landon and the Pros Adaptive and Inclusive Recreation team. They actually take all the accommodations requests for the Parks and Recreation Department. And so if anyone needs an accommodation for their Parks Recreation services, they actually take those requests and they accommodate or work on accommodating individuals who need accommodations for that specific program or service for the city. So those are all of the city's ADA coordinators. So we're actually doing quite well when it comes to meeting that mandate here at the city. We've had quite a bit of progress to date on requirements 1 through 5. As a reminder, the city started to actively update the self-evaluation and transition plan in 2022. And since that time, they have hired the full-time ADA coordinator. We've done a number of policy updates and posted that notice, that requirement for notice, all over the city, all over the website. It's very clearly in all of our public-facing facilities. We have created a new grievance and accommodation request online, and we have clearly communicated where folks can find that grievance form and request an accommodation. We have focused a lot on providing training and learning tools for staff, and so we've created a number of internal mechanisms for staff to self-learn through our SharePoint site, but we also provide quarterly trainings and trainings upon request to different departments here at the city. We've done a number of communication and website improvements to get the word out that we do have a grievance process and that we accept accommodations and how people can request accommodations at the city. And we've been focusing really on pushing through phases 1 through 4 of that mandated self-evaluation and transition plan that the ADA requires. So just to give you a visual, this is where we're at. We phased out the self-evaluation and transition plan into 4 phases. So we're here, we're kind of graduating from phase 1, although there's a couple of things that we need to do to get that completed. And we're pushing into phase 2 of the self-evaluation and transition plan, which is going to focus on emergency planning and operations. Phase 3 will focus on all the buildings, facilities, and structures here at the city, minus any parks, recreation, and open space facilities like playgrounds and things like that. That's going to be phase 4. So hopefully all of this will be complete, at least the initial self-evaluation and transition plan, and finalized by 2027. So what have we done so far in the self-evaluation? So basically we're wrapping up phase 1 of the self-evaluation and transition plan. That is focused almost exclusively on the public right-of-way infrastructure. So we've got a number of really wonderful people here from the Public Works team who are the experts and the engineers, but we've focused a lot on field collection and stakeholder engagement around the public right-of-way. So that has been a big, huge part of the public right-of-way phase 1 transition or self-evaluation. And now we have a number of goals that came out of that field data collection and on our from our stakeholder engagement. We focused in that transition plan phase on curb ramps, sidewalks, and push buttons. So what are some of our key findings in the self-evaluation and transition plan? So these are our key findings. 92% of pedestrian push buttons in the city of Aurora are non-compliant under both the ADA standards. So this might be getting a little too technical, but there's actually 2 ADA standards. There's a standard that's adopted. They're called the 2010 ADA standards, but then there's actually an industry best practice that we are guessing that the federal government is going to push through in the next few years, called the public right-of-way, the PROWAG. But under both of those standards, our field data that was collected found that under both those standards, about 92% of pedestrian push buttons in the city are non-compliant with those standards. 95.9% of curb ramps in the city of Aurora, including within the newer developments, were non-compliant under the current ADA standards, and 77.91% of sidewalks were non-compliant under the current ADA standards. So those were the three major findings of all that field data collection under the self-evaluation. And those are just some pictures of, to give you an idea of like what they're collecting out in the field when they are checking for ADA compliance. There's just hundreds of things that they're looking at when they're looking at different pieces of the infrastructure. It could be slope, it could be, you know, the size of the curb ramp, it could be the way that, for example, a mobility device can get across the street from one side of the street to the other street. So there's a lot of different things that they're looking at for compliance when they're doing that field data collection. So there were 11 goals that came out of the self-evaluation, and those are going to be the goals that we're going to focus on implementing for the city for the public right-of-way. The first goal was to undertake a comprehensive review of the city policies related to the right-of-way and determine whether to fully or partially adopt the Department of Justice's PROWAG, that's public right-of-way accessibility guidelines, as an industry best practice. Those are not yet required by the federal regulations, but they have already been adopted by the Colorado Department of Transportation. They've already been adopted by the Federal Highway Administration. And so they are considered a best practice. And they, so we will be looking very closely at that, or the city engineer's office will be looking very closely at that and determining whether it suits or fits, or we're able to adopt the PROWAG in whole or in part. And how that will impact other programs of the city. The second goal is to adopt and implement a policy directing that as streets are resurfaced as part of Aurora's annual maintenance program, any adjacent non-compliant curb ramps are reconstructed, including by adding dome panels to curb ramps without detectable warning surfaces. So that's a lot of technical language, but it's basically saying that every time we repave a street now, we will be putting in new curb ramps, and that's going to help get us into compliance moving forward without having to add a separate program, service, or activity just to work on curb ramps. So every time they repave, they're going to put a new curb ramp in to meet that, or to comply with that ADA standard. Transition plan goal 3 is adopt and implement a policy on preferred locations and accommodations for pedestrian street crossings, which includes spacing criteria for street crossings, as well as other guidance for pedestrian signals and push buttons. So we didn't, it's kind of hard to say, you know, when you're about 95% out of compliance with with push buttons and pedestrian signals, to say, okay, we just need to do them all. And so this is really encouraging us to come up with certain criteria based on need, and that the traffic folks would implement to be able to find the best locations, the most needed locations for updating street signals and push buttons and things like that, instead of just, you know, one at a time, or even, you know, you might have a particular project, but this helps them create criteria and prioritize those push buttons and street signals. The transition plan goal is very similar to transition plan goal 4, but it has to do with pedestrian infrastructure. It's creating a criteria and a ranking system. Our sidewalk program already has a ranking system that they use, and this is just suggesting that the ADA be incorporated into any of those ranking systems that that departments use to decide when to place sidewalks or when to place new crosswalks and curb ramps and things like that. So that's the suggestion there. Transition plan goal 5 is to integrate the ADA compliance data into existing GIS databases. So the city uses a geospatial mapping system, and they all, you know, the engineering programs here at Public Works, they all use this system to basically locate where certain projects are being undertaken, and to keep track of those projects and the work that they've done on those projects. And this is just saying that we're recommending that the ADA compliance criteria be integrated into the GIS mapping system, much like all of the other current programming or criteria are are integrated in there. And then integrate ADA compliance into the city's asset management framework for curb ramps, sidewalks, and pedestrian push buttons. A lot of the same thing. It was separated out, but it really is just, really focusing on integrating ADA into existing programs or processes that the different departments are using, and sort of adding that to their other criteria like safety or, whatever those criteria are. The seventh goal is to develop and use ADA compliance checklists. This is more of a focus on process improvement, just to ensure that the folks that are going at the city who are going out in the field and doing things like inspecting new projects, that they actually have a tool that they can use, that where they can very easily also see that the construction project is ADA compliant. Transition plan goal 8 is to adopt a policy and procedure to guide staff in communication with persons with disabilities. That includes guidance on effective alternative communication. This is just really focused on a policy. We'll be working on perhaps a separate policy or adding to the existing policy, or more on training efforts to train staff on effective alternative communication, and probably putting a directory together on how folks can find interpreters, or how folks can, find alternative tools for communication if necessary. Transition plan goal 9 is to identify key representatives from each department to serve as ADA contacts. So we're putting together a working group from different departments. We found through this process that it was really essential in order to get the ADA mandates out and distributed to different programs citywide. We're a very large city that we're encouraging different departments to come and join a working group. So each department can have a representative that would meet perhaps quarterly or monthly to just discuss ADA issues and get the word back on any policy changes or any issues that come up, and they can get it back and get the communication across departments so that we're all on the same page. There's the 10th transition plan goal, which is to update the plan on a yearly basis. That's more process and procedure. And then transition plan goal 11 is once the ADA compliance is integrated into the GIS database, to update the city's GIS database on a yearly basis to capture and document completed accessibility improvements for ramps. So this is just another process improvement goal. It just really says we want to be able to track all the updates that we're doing, just in case we're asked, then we can report on it and say we've done this many improvements per year for this long. So that's really, again, a process improvement goal. Okay, so progress to date is basically we've had different departments already working on a lot of this stuff for phase 1 of the transition plan. So we've had quite a bit of progress to date, but there are a couple of things that we're working on needing to do in order to get to the next phase of the transition plan. So we've completed the self-evaluation. We have the draft transition plan, which was actually provided in your backup material. So you can read that as well if you want. There's, I think, 45, 50 pages, but it's there for you. But we have completed the transition plan, but now as mandated by the ADA, we have to bring it up for public comment. And so we do have to have it approved by council to move forward for public comment in order to finalize that part of the transition plan. And we have hired consultants for phases 2 through 4 of the self-evaluation and transition plan. And just last week, we had a kickoff meeting with staff to talk about next steps for phases 2 and 3 of the self-evaluation and transition plan. So that's pretty much our progress to date on the self-evaluation and transition plan. Our next steps, again, I already discussed that, but if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And then I also have some experts here from the public works, traffic, and engineering, and streets folks too, if there's some very technical questions you have that need to be answered.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. That's well thought out. Thanks, guys. Thank you. And I'm glad, we were talking about the retrofitting of the ramps, getting them into compliance. It's part of Carly, maybe you or oh, there you are. Would that be as part of the sidewalk renovation, the sidewalk plan? Are you doing it in that way as that's progressing, or is it, because it sounds like you're trying to do two things at once, maybe. So we're not like doing expense just for those things that are out of compliance. So are we kind of melding those together?
I provide an overview of the annual concrete program and how that works and how that's anticipated to work moving forward.
Sure. So Councilmember Hancock, Kirby Olner, Deputy Director of Operations. So to kind of give just a quick overview of our program, any street that's earmarked for paving, mill overlay reconstruction, we're going to go in there and assess the infrastructure on both sides. So sidewalk, curb gutter, curb ramps, anything that is non-compliant with ADA or just broken, deteriorated, whatever, we're going to go in there and replace that before we pave the street. And that's every street on our list. And it's, we have a north program and a south program. All that work has to be done before we do anything with the pavement. That is outlined in the PROAG, as Carlin identified. That's required for us to do that. So does that answer your question?
Understood. I just, was thinking about, because trying to get the biggest bang for our buck, as we always do, looking at, as we're doing these projects, getting ourselves into compliance, how are we approaching that so that we're being cost efficient and also being in compliance as well? Because you had mentioned that also, I'm looking at the diagram here, I'm seeing the ramp there. Is that including like, are the poles out of compliance too? So if someone has to push the button across the street, is that also being impacted?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Carlin, you probably want to start with more of a
Kind of a big picture. So,
Exactly.
yes. So the key to this is to be very conscientious about cost and making sure that we don't cause an undue financial or administrative burden on the city as we're moving forward. So really, we're very forward focused. The key to the transition plan is the ADA is very process focused. So the key to being in compliance is to identify that that the issue is there and to have a plan for addressing the issue. Whether that ends up being a 10-year plan or a 120-year plan, the ADA isn't clear. So what we've been trying to do is get the plan together, have a big picture plan, and then each department, so I think that's where the prioritizing, creating criteria is going to be really important, is identifying what parts of the infrastructure are most used, safety issues, things that are close to schools and hospitals. These are all criteria that, the different departments can look at and create a prioritization. And then also take that public feedback about what people have said in their public feedback and where the highest need is. And then you prioritize based on those identified needs. And then you kind of get your biggest bang for the buck because, obviously if you have a very large area where there's a lot of traffic and then you have more pedestrian traffic and that potentially includes mobility devices and that sort of thing, you want to focus on that. You also want to focus on places that people are trying to get to more, hospitals, commercial centers, schools, for example. So with the criteria, they're going to get more bang for their buck. But it's kind of we have a sort of an individual process, and then this is more of the plan, the big picture process. At the same time, we have an accommodation process that we've created and that the city of Eck has actually always had, but we've made it more clear that we have it and that people can submit accommodation requests, and we have a grievance process. So I am still taking, and the public works folks are still taking individual accommodation requests from the public and handling those on a case-by-case basis as is mandated by the ADA. And so those are being taken from individuals throughout the city to handle things on an individual basis, while at the same time, the bang for our buck is going to be creating the prioritization criteria. Each department's a little bit different on how they're prioritizing.
I'll just answer one of your questions. So I'm Carly Camposano, Deputy Director, Transportation, Mobility, and Public Works. So your question about push buttons and also sidewalk projects. So we've also talked with Carlin and the project team through this ADA transition plan on what types of activities, what types of projects or maintenance activities trigger the need to upgrade ramps and ADA facilities. So with any new traffic signal, new sidewalk project, we are upgrading ramps with those as well. It's also more efficient to be in the same place and do all the work at once, so it makes sense. But as you asked, and Carlin, I think, mentioned with push buttons, a lot of them are out of compliance, but a lot of that is because of the ramps and the location of the buttons. So maybe the button is at the correct height, it's the correct type of button, it has the verbal indication that's our newer buttons do. But if it's located within, where the slope of the adjacent pavement is greater than a certain amount, then it still isn't compliant. So we need to do more of like the flat work around the buttons. And it's kind of a whole system. So we're trying to kind of define what we should do all at once with a project, if that hopefully answers the
Yes, that
question.
does.
Okay.
I appreciate the fact that you're, prioritizing the compliance and getting those things retrofitted if necessary. I'm very, kind of surprised to see how out of compliance we actually are. And, the thinking about, is the city at risk? Are we setting ourselves up for exposure? Legally. I don't want that to happen, but I also want us to, make this part of the priority as we're doing the streets and the sidewalks and the curves, that we're doing this all at once. So we're not, whacking a mole on this thing, doing it here, there, and everywhere. Keeping in mind, because you're the expert of the complaints and the grievances that you're getting in for people in the high risk areas or the high traffic areas, so that we're attacking those things first. So that we're, we set ourselves up to not be exposed. That's my concern right now, to make sure that we're not exposed to any undue litigation because we're not in compliance.
Let me add it on that. So do we have a timeline? I know you guys trying to, prioritizing on ADA compliance on this one, but do we have a timeline, in order to be compliant on this,
So, yes, that's still, yes, there's been a recommended timeline. It's about 150-year timeline for full compliance, which is pretty normal. I just want to say, a lot of what you saw, even though the numbers are pretty high, are pretty normal for cities. From what we've heard from our consultants, a lot of cities, when they do this evaluation, they see a lot of this. So, so that's one thing too. I know you see the numbers near, but it's pretty normal data that most cities who are undertaking the updates to their self-evaluation and transition plan are seeing. A lot because to get the guidance from the feds took a long time. And then, having, getting the communication and the funding and things to update it. So yes, you're always at some kind of risk, but it is something that a lot of cities see. It's not, the numbers aren't unique to the city of Aurora for sure. The ADA really focuses on the plan. And so as long as we're showing that we have a plan, that we, the biggest risk is that we're integrating the curb ramps when we do the streets repaving. Now that we're doing that with every new project, that's going to minimize a lot of the risk. And like you said, the fact that we have an individual accommodation process, and for the next 2 years, the funding in the ADA transition plan program for this actually can cover some very high need expenses, or that's going to be our hope, that we in the next 2 years with that pot that we have for allocated for the ADA self-evaluation and transition plan, is if there is an immediate high need that comes through an individual accommodation process, that we'll be able to get through that to minimize risk as well, if that helps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that is helpful,
Yeah.
because that was just the first thing I thought.
Yes, and to add too, for our capital budget annually, we have a 5-year capital budget. So Public Works pros will plan through what the next 5 years, what those projects will look like. And for instance, the paving plan, Public Works is looking 5 years ahead. So that allows us to the annual budget process to make sure that we're shifting resources around so that we can keep up and take forth these recommendations for curb ramps and address these as we're going forward project by project or program by program in the annual capital budget as well.
Okay.
So this is a really strong guiding document for the departments to implement as part of our budgeting process and our policies.
That's helpful, because just looking at that, I'm like, eek, what are we doing? We're in trouble. So we're not in as much trouble as I thought. Okay, that's very helpful to know, because I want our city, again, to be accessible to everyone. And if whatever we need to do to make sure we're in compliance with that, and that, where you live, work, and play that's the purpose of this committee. So to make sure that we're doing what we should be doing in terms of that. Do you have anything else to add?
Thanks.
I think a lot of the focus too is to be, to do it right and not just do it. So we really want to be proactive, not reactive. And so, we could just be reactive and say every time, we see something, we need to fix it, we need to do it right way. But really what's important is to have a plan and integrate it into the capital planning. So that it's just another, checklist on all the other criteria that the public works folks have when they're thinking about where they need to put in a sidewalk or a curb ramp or a repave a street or that sort of thing. So,
Great.
yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for this update. Is there anything, this is just for our information? Is there anything else?
Information, the next step will be asking you all if you're comfortable referring this to study session, because as Carla mentioned, for each of the phases, we do have requirements for council approval and they require a public hearing. So answering your questions today, and then the question to you all is, are you comfortable referring this now on to study session to complete the process for phase 1?
Yeah, that's good. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
We're comfortable with that. Let's do that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for your attention and your research and giving us this information. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I'm always available if anybody, if you have individual questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happened to this room. This is not our room. Let's get there.
She like it this way.
Oh, you like it? Laura likes it better this way. It's like we're in elementary
There was a meeting before us. There was a meeting before us.
I figured.
We ran out of time.
And they always take up all of our time. Sorry, public, we're sorry, we're just rattling on. Do we have any miscellaneous matters for consideration? Nothing. How about our anticipated topics for next meeting? I know we've got some.
Let me walk up here so you don't have to turn around.
Got it.
All right, so for the next meeting in August, we have a Green Valley Ranch public improvement funding agreement that Haley will be bringing. It's a second amendment, it looks like, for that agreement. Haley's also hopefully going to be bringing a 38th Avenue Maintenance and Operations IGA with Adams County. We've had that on for a while, so we're still hopeful that will move forward. We also have an agreement with E470 for the Guardrail Bridge. So a little bit of background on that. The South Aurora Regional Improvement Authority had design money allocated through the first bonding issuance for the E470 Guardrail Bridge widening. They have since went out again, and now we have funding for construction. And through conversations, we were so happily surprised. E470 said, well, we will contribute $2 million to the bridge. So we are super excited about that. They've been a wonderful partner. So that will be coming. And then we're also going to bring our 9-mile pedestrian bridge maintenance agreement with CDOT, and we'll give you an update on where that project is at right now.
Great. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Then I guess, wow, that was all we had.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, made you all come for nothing. But it was important. We needed to hear because we did all that work. We needed you to be here in person. So I certainly do appreciate that. I want to confirm that our next meeting will be August 21st, right here, same bat time, same bat channel, right here. And if there's nothing else, we will give you 25 minutes back to your day. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.